Test, test, test. Okay, that's working. Your camera? Ooh. Ah. That's not me. But we will use that one right there, Sarah. I think last time I didn't talk about that so much. Let's see, I can move this out some. A little bit more. And that should do it. Cool. Chat. Participants. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Erasers are over there. Yay. Excellent. Cool, cool, cool. All right. 4 minutes.
Did you see Dr. Paulson's retiring?
Yeah, I
I
did.
was like, good riddance.
I actually, today was the first time I actually had time to had an opportunity to talk to him.
He's a lot nicer than I really made him out to be.
Yeah. He's been doing that for like 15 years. The undergraduate research day, they mentioned that today because this was his last time doing it.
Mhm.
My goodness. That is amazing. To keep that up for that long.
I just hope it doesn't fall through now that he's gonna leave.
Yeah. And sometimes.
Cause you're not paid to do that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the thing, is that if you're not paid to do something, a lot of people don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very common. Why am I doing it? It's the money. No, it's not. It's not the money. It's about the value that's added. And to some degree, it's like, if you stop paying attention to the whether it's that element of it, like the personal element of it, you just focus on the work. What ends up happening is as it builds, it's like you build yourself, but you're not really paying any attention to it. And the next thing is like, got people working you for stuff. Let's see, we got about 3 minutes. I need to run upstairs real quick because I forgot to look at something real quick before I come in. And then we'll talk a little about Sarah, because I know we mentioned in which one of these chapters is it? I should remember it, but I don't. I think it was in that section here, but could also come up again today. Yeah, it'll come up again today, because when you start evaluating stuff, you have a close panel up there. That's why that's on my mind. Let me run upstairs. I will be right back.
Okay.
What are you doing after graduation?
I don't know. Really not sure. I'm scared. Wanna end up with a federal agency, not a federal agency, state agency. The whole idea of moving around all the time really doesn't really appeal to me. I'd have just joined the military if it did. I wouldn't have spent the last 4 years here. That takes time, so I think I might have to start just as a street cop for a couple years. That experience,
Yeah.
because I've heard people just, toss the resume right in the shredder if it didn't have at least 2 years. Like, I thought that's why I was going to school, but my bad. What about you?
I don't know, I have a few different places wanting to know when I'm graduating so that they can get me. I want a juvenile place here and then travel, obviously. But I don't know if I really want to do any of that. It sounds good, but then I hear of other people just like the stress of it and all that stuff. And then I have this place in Fayetteville, which I like Fayetteville. I don't know if I want to move there.
Right, that's the thing, is I'm not sure I wanna go too far. Cause on one hand, so I've been with my boyfriend for 4 years now. And he's not gonna be done with school for a year after I am. So, it's I can't really go someplace and settle down, because I don't know where he's gonna go.
Yeah.
He's fish and wildlife, so it's a little bit more particular than criminal justice. There's crime everywhere. Fish only are in water. I don't really wanna leave the state. At least not too far.
When? Interventions. All right, so it is officially 5:30. How's everyone today?
Tired.
Tired. I know the feeling. Whew. Between, what was it, that, talk earlier today and class here today, it's like, I literally had to go and crash out kind of thing. Level in that semester was just like, powering down, and if I don't find somewhere to land real fast, I'm just gonna land right here.
Sincerely. That was what happened when I submitted last week's assignment. I was like, I know this sucks. I'm like, I know parts of this are
Ooh,
awful.
we should probably talk a little bit.
I'm like, I couldn't do it
Yeah,
anymore.
no, and well, that's the whole point of this is one, playing with ideas, and two, just starting to build. And so as you're building this, it's just that process. I mean, just think about, here in a second, we'll talk about interventions, but think about what you've been asked to do over the course of the semester, just in terms of thought processes, readings, and that kind of stuff. You have to be able to integrate multiple fields, multiple areas, and be able to try to bring about changes that are good, right? From the outset, depending on where you're at, you'll hit different stages. And this is the point in the book when they finally get to the end where they really kind of outline what that functionally really looks like when you go to do it. And so that's, part of the difficulty with academia. It's like everything you say, and then you have to go and do it kind of thing. And it's like, there's that whole element of what people say versus what people do kind of thing. You got that in there, and it's really, really hard to bridge that gap. And so that first step is just literally just playing with those ideas and putting those words in paper. And once you start from there, it's just seeing where it develops and where it takes you. To some degree, it's going to be natural. To some degree, you're going to want to control it to benefit you as best as you can. And that's kind of the role of those papers. And I'm a little bit behind on grading those for this week because other grading, I love this time of year. But I should get those back to you. Let's see, I was looking at those this morning. It shouldn't take me that long. What I'll do is probably the first thing I'll want you to do is if we haven't kind of sat down and kind of looked at where, like, the very, very specific pinpoint, like how does this serve you kind of thing, not just like here, because of course it's going to serve you here, but like how does it serve you more widely? And if we can start leveraging that, we will. But what I'll do is I'll send you probably an article that will give you something to start with in terms of a model. This is, I'm looking at that, part of that, just the research and gathering information. As you're reading literature articles on your topics, I mean, I remember that. Right? Every time I do that, it's like a Clint Eastwood film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, right? You can find the ones that, this is exactly what I'm kind of thinking about. And those ones it's like, you said this, but you do anything like that at all. And then you get the ones that's like, that really, I really don't know what to do with that article. I'm gonna go set that one over here. And so, as you're doing that, make sure you are saving those articles too, because that'll be something to jump back into. And so that's your own personal library. And so that'll help with that. But that model, what we'll do is we'll start identifying the elements from that really would matter to you. And so the development side is pretty easy. It's literally kind of assessing what's out there in the landscape and those resources, bringing them together and stacking them up. And you'll see that this is kind of where they outline that process in terms of people. So we'll talk about interventions to begin with, and then talk about like the what, where, when, who, to some degree, I guess I should put that one. Who, what, where, when, why, and how kind of thing. But I'll get that feedback to you. I'd say tomorrow will probably be a recovery day. And then there'll be meetings and grading Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So it might be as late as Sunday. I wouldn't think it'd take me that long though, because you guys are finding this pretty well. And so as soon as I get those back out to you for that May 1, I think that's the next deadline. That would be Wednesday, 1 week from today. Those revisions that I'll have on there will look something like what we had before. I might put in some new sections if you need it kind of thing. If there's any top players, it's like, hey, this element right here, you might want to speak to that a little bit. But really, it's just making sure that it flows and you've got a good base to build from. And so it's also one of the reasons why I don't really care about page numbers and that kind of things. Like, I never really care about that, I care about the content. As you see with it's like asking the difference between an article and a book. The article, get it down to like 15 to 30 pages. That book will take 300 to make the same points. And so it's like, you want to condense that down, that's fine. It's like, as long as it comes across that meaning, short, brief, detail. It's like, you got all those things, excellent. So don't worry about that so much, but we'll keep building. This, interventions. So anytime we start talking about interventions and stuff, here's like an analysis for interventions, so you're trying to gather information on. We need to first start by talking about what interventions look like. And so, what do interventions look like? When we start talking about interventions, what are we talking about?
Crime intervention, kind of
Yeah,
future prevention.
yeah, crime in the future. Ooh, let's do it this way. Get my own conspiratorial. Pre-crime. There we go. So you got some pre-crime stuff in there, right? What else? Okay, so here's where the method side will start to come back in, and we'll bring it in every now. And so probably the first thing you want to stop and think about is like, you're getting into it right here. This right here is this is one of those reasons why. Right? The purpose of this is to address crime and prevent it. Right? And so that will drive all these other questions. But we're going to start at the base. Right? And so when we start talking about it, the first thing to start thinking about is that probably level kind of thing. And so what level are we talking about? It can range quite a bit. And so you got everything from the individual, but here's where you start getting into the more of the group levels, and ideally we're talking about neighborhoods, cities, counties, that kind of thing, and you move up from there. So you start getting more towards that level. Once you start looking at that, you can also look at states. If you want to look at country overall, the processes, the methodological process you use would change a little bit. That'd be different than some of the stuff we talked about in here before. But you could look at the interventions, at country level if you wanted to. And whether that's comparing across countries or just looking at within country, how this particular change manifests like that. So you've got a whole wide variety of things you can look at. What it tends to look like, particularly with these, this one's kind of a unique one. What kind of interventions do we have that affect things at the state or country level?
In a state or country level?
Yeah. Ooh. I don't know if it's just. Think top down. Particularly here and here. And while you're thinking about that, we'll play with the word intervention a little bit. So anytime you hear the word intervention, yeah, you have that, I don't say intervening, but that something came in and made a change kind of thing. And so when you start dealing with that, changes themselves cause actions, but they are changes too, or actions too. So if you're going to have a change in action, where will you see a top-down action at this and this level. Who's gonna have the authority? He's gone now. It's okay. That thing will be gone for now. Okay,
I'm not sure.
we'll drop down here for a second. Who? Anytime we're gonna have an intervention, you're gonna have to figure out who is involved. You know, that's gonna be everything from, ooh. How do you wanna put this? That entire process is gonna underlie that intervention. Who's it aimed towards, right? Who does it require? That kind of thing. Who has a stake in the game? That kind of thing. And so all the people that are invested in whatever processes, whatever systems that you have already in place, like, best thing that you can do for people is give them a voice at minimum, right? If you start going with like organizations, one of the first things that they'll tell you that improves organizational health, decreases turnover and things like that is do you have any way to send feedback, you know, from the bottom up? Because that's one of those things that sends, hey, we care, we're invested in this jointly, right? And so that's a huge, huge factor. And so when you start thinking about this top-down thing, who's gonna be involved here? You're probably gonna be talking about things like government officials, right? You get there real fast. Now, that can be any number of levels, which is why you list out counties, cities, states, that kind of thing. Think about every time. Here's a good one. Interventions or actions? Acts. Okay? I put that up there, I mean, from the governmental side, right? Any governmental act that gets passed is a change. That change is gonna cause some other changes. You know, it's like, who was it I was talking about this earlier today? Marijuana laws, right? Those things changed drastically just 5, 6 years ago, 2008, 2018, 2019, somewhere in that range, right? Because of that one action, well, people across all these levels had to change their behaviors. That's something that had a great big effect. And what effect it has won't ever be from the outset clear. And so whatever acts that we take, whatever interventions that we take, we need to make sure that at minimum, or at least not harming, right? We don't make it worse. Ideally, we help, and it'd be even better if we helped in the best of ways, but just getting to where we're just helping is itself a very difficult thing. And you have to realize that, you know, whether you're talking about who, government officials, whether you're talking about, service providers, that could be any number of things, whether you're talking about like governmental services, health service, any service really. You know, you could even say that of, you know, the police themselves, that there is a service there, right? Whoever's providing it, they're gonna be in there. Recipients, that kind of thing. Ideally, you want to have them have some type of say too. Not always the case in this field, but usually. And, you know, other types of stakeholders, right? Anyone who's got investment, resources that would be utilized, anything of that nature. So you have to take a bit of time to stop and think about a project, if it's going to require an intervention or if it's something that by its nature already does. Okay, who's invested? What are not so much what makes them work, but okay, what is their purpose to some degree? What resources are they bringing into it? And so you get some level of investment. You get some level of, well, group activities kind of things we start dealing with. Because when you really want to get these things going, no intervention relies on one person alone. And so that's a big facet. And we'll talk more about that process. So we've got actions. It's like basically anything that causes a change. Now, that can be on the big scale, like, hey, we've had a major revision to whether it's criminal statutes or any number of things. We can also have lower level ones. If you start talking about lower level ones, and I have these in reverse. We'll start with that one for a second. Individual interventions. What do those tend to look like?
The old, you have a problem, Charlie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, that could be anything from, I want to put that. I think probably the easiest way to do it from a methodological standpoint is this word right here. Experiment. Right, your classical experiment will have pre, measure, some type of intervention, post. And so you can usually, ideally, you have more and more groups, you can see if that intervention actually works. And so you have that, okay, how much of a change did the intervention actually make? How does it compare to interventions across other times? That's your classical experiment. And as you look at, well, actually, let's do this. The where and the when. By this point, semester, you should realize that those things are so innately tied, you can't really separate them out, right? It's like why they say space-time. It's really just one concept. It's just it manifests in a few different directions and moves a few different ways. Here. Gonna be that kind of thing. To some degree. When? How do you know if you need to change your interventions? That kind of thing. Or if you need to intervene at all. Let's say that there's. How do you know if you need an intervention?
Do you have a problem?
There you go. Before you get that, you need to start going over here and see, what is your problem? Right? And so, between these 4 chapters, analysis, deciding what to do, implementation, and evaluation, essentially what they're all dividing into is that methodological process and some of the nuances there. You'll find that the same processes that you'd use to analyze these things will be the same ones that you use to analyze problems to some degree. It's just how you're using it. So I left this up here. Sarah, you've heard that phrase before, yes? Yeah, do you remember what it stood for? Stands for? I know. I wouldn't remember either of that and I'd be teaching policing courses. Search, assess, no, search, analyze, respond, assess. Right? Gather information, see what you have, do something, see if it worked, right? You'll see this, what is it, deciding what to do kind of thing. This process can be, it'll be reiterated in a number of different ways, a number of different people kind of thing, and you'll see different, I don't want to say interpretations of it, but basically what it is they might throw in additional steps or you're still talking the same overall process though. Gathering information, analyzing, basing your actions off of it, and then when it's all said and done, did it actually do it? So that first thing is that problem analysis stage. And so that's gonna look different depending on what type of entities you're interacting with, whether you're talking about levels, whether you're talking about people, kind of thing. And so, get over to this. When it comes to, a lot of information, it's methodology, but that same thing we're kind of describing a few weeks back when I was talking about the relationship between these questions and how they all fit together. And so, for crime prevention, this process, determining what interventions are taking place, something along the lines of this, and that methodological analysis are going to be intertwined. The specific steps you take will look a little different, but not really. Okay. For crime prevention, in this chapter, they get down to it. Where was that? It's pretty well, if I remember correctly. Edit, I guess, a name Chrome extension. Here, it's right backwards. Share screen. Screen one. Okay, I don't know what this, what computer stuff. I should have clicked no. Over here. Here we go. Okay, so analysis for intervention. Basically, starting with handbook for crime prevention kind of thing, basic property. So they give you some trend stuff about property thefts and that kind of thing. Basically, that has been on the decrease for decades. Production of crime maps, that kind of thing. Prosecutors was meant mentioned by the term intervention in preventing crime, different types of activities and decision makings. Particular attention to types of analyses needed to inform decisions, right? So in some ways, when you pick your interests, you'll pick to some degree the types of theories that are available, because those are going to be the concepts that tie into it. There's going to be the element of the methodology that's going to be innately tied to existing research and the concepts that you're dealing with. And then when you start going to act on it, you have to do that same thing. Okay, so interventions to prevent crime. They start talking about nature, scale, mechanisms, and outcomes, right? What is it doing? How big is it? How does it work? And then when I actually look at it, what do we see happens when we make changes? Here's where they get at it. Right here. The crime intervention process. And we'll go back to some of the other stuff earlier. So you can kind of see how these things fit together, because boy, do they. Anytime you start talking about the interventions, you notice that on the aggregate, they'll move up here to policy stuff, because policies are what drive organizations. And anytime you have group, anytime you have any group, really, it's like, if it's an official group, this is how they'll note how things are done, right? We have a policy on that, what do the documents say on that kind of thing, following those types of flows. So first step right there, that scanning thing, right? This is dealing with crime prevention. Go right to crime analysis, which seems a little out of step here. But that's because you're trying to verify what actually is the problem, right? What is the nature of it? Where is it taking place? That kind of thing. Then you move into design, capitalize delivery, evaluation, and analysis. Again, you go all the way back to that same process. You just did a different thing, right? This is policy through here. Okay. So that first stage of crime analysis, actually each of those stages, like one, how much information does that one statement cover? You're gonna be dealing with a lot. Just that crime analysis thing, it's like this is just one of many books on it. It's like you can see that thing's pretty big. Basically, when you start getting at there is what types do we use? How does it work? What are we doing? Right? Got a little slide in here that shows you its flow. As you can see, it's a recursive system, meaning it feeds back into itself, but it does it in a couple of different manners, right? You have the crime analysis side, you have the policy analysis side, and you have everything evolving into actual development. When you get to that, like from the outset, you're probably talking in this area. Most likely here and large cities. You're in that level for the most part where you're doing crime analysis. Not always, but the bulk of it's going to be here. The bulk of it's going to be put into those who have usually work for police departments, that kind of thing. And so they're constantly keeping up that. You'll have teams that do that at city level, big cities. And so the types of analyses they do, it's like we've been talking about them to some degree, but they're talking time of day, time of week, crime types, all of those things. As you intersect all those different relationships, you see, depending on what your specific focus is, changes quite a bit. And so, to some degree, this is going to drive it. Purpose there is the big thing. All right. So as you're going through this, crime analysis, policy design, go up to the questions. Right here. So here are the questions. You get a clear understanding of what the local crime problems are. Right? Some degree you'll get it from here. At that same time, you'll be running or maybe even after the fact, depending on how you do it. Time work for that process works a little bit. This will also feed those discussions with those stakeholders, right? Because those stakeholders, your government officials, you're talking police departments, you're talking elected officials or anything of that nature. It's like you're going to be having those conversations at the same time you're doing this, or at least while you have this information. So that way, as you're getting that, you're going to get both sides, right? Here's what the data says. Here's what people say the problems are. As you're listening to them, they're going to give you information about maybe their perspectives, what should be done with that kind of thing. Here's their involvement. Here's how it relates to them. And as you keep their involvement as high as you can, kind of thing, it's like you keep them in mind as you're designing this, as you're moving forward. Let's see. Choose an intervention and how to tackle them. That's pretty straightforward. I don't know if I need to talk about that one so much. There's a lot of options there, but basically what you do is you use logic and reasoning. Okay. Determine whether or not chosen interventions are appropriate. Okay, so that's where they start to get into a little bit about the nature of these types of things. How often do we have large actions on these types of scales that are driven from this? Not always is that the case. In fact, if you start really getting into it, most of whether it's like political processes or anything like that, a lot of it's going to be I don't want to say that. Let me think about that for a second. Limitations of numbers and limitations on what people's understandings of it. So you'll see most people, whenever they come to an issue, they'll bring in whether it's stereotypes, experiential knowledge, previous things that they've encountered, that kind of stuff. And you introduce some biases there, so you have to keep that in mind while you're doing it. But I don't want to say that purpose. Like that looking like you're acting kind of thing to itself does do some degree too. That's a different conversation. Here. How many things start like this when it comes to we're going to make changes, whether it's policy changes, whether it's governmental changes, that kind of stuff. This isn't typically what happens. Typically what happens is it starts on that social side. You've got an organization that starts or is going, and those people who are involved, those people we're meeting and discussing, and they'll develop something. And it'll get implemented, and then after the fact, people will decide, okay, well, at some point we need to assess this and see if it's really working. And at that point in time, you're coming in down here, and none of this other stuff has taken place in the ways that they kind of suggest for best practices. Because best practices is you're gonna start here with any and all data that's available, you're gonna be analyzing, you're gonna be making decisions based off of that. It's not always the way that it happens. So from the outset, but I think when it gets into the evaluation and review kind of things, one of the big things you have to do is just figure out those questions that we start out with, like, okay, what is this? Who's receiving it? How is it working? Kind of thing. What is its purpose? When you get to those two things, and those are your goals and kinds of things that you look to really assess. What is it we say we're doing? What is it we're doing? And are we doing it? Kind of thing. And then these are the questions that drive you to get to the point where you can actually analyze it. Right? What aspects need to be analyzed and why? And that next one is kind of intervention. What points and times are they needed? Okay, so that's going to be your due dates, that kind of stuff. Data sets. What will the results going to tell us? It's like, to some degree, that's a little hard to say because you won't know that exactly, but you'll have certain outcomes that you know are possible. Right? As I'm analyzing this, it's either significant, positive, negative, that kind of thing. So you can kind of see here are the different ways that it may actually shape. One of the things I want to say, that time element. Just in that crime analysis side, it's like, just think about that. How many different, what's your scope of the problem? How big is it? And when it comes to the analysis side, what timeframes are we dealing with? Are we dealing with months, days, years? Are we targeting issues that are like recurrent and over a large period of times? Or are we dealing with something that's popped up in the immediate? That kind of thing. It's like if you're watching, if you're involved in crime analysis for a big city, and all of a sudden you see a certain type of crime starts spiking up, it's like, okay, there might be an intervention that's needed. How do we decide what it is? Well, let's take a look at what's actually going on and how we handle it. Because all this policy stuff is about how, right? Essentially, anytime you're dealing with these things, how? That's process. Process should align with that purpose, your why. And then from there, when you delve into that who, what, where, and when, it all enables the how. Okay. Next set of questions. Relevant questions in relation to the above. Where are we putting our crime prevention? What locations and timing? Do they correspond to what we're seeing in terms of problems? Because that's when you get into the specific, right? We want to deal with specifics. Do communities with similar levels and patterns of crime receive similar attention? So what are we doing? All right, that's but there's a term for that. Can't remember. Basically, when you start dealing with that one is your intervention efforts. Whether you're talking about specific programs or even just policing in general, it's like that's one of the ways that they establish what needs are as you look across cities to make that argument, that kind of thing. How far is there an inverse prevention law? Areas with lower crimes receive more attention. So that's basically what they start getting at is, okay, so very easily we could send all of our crimes to all of our intervention efforts to hotspot areas, but is that what functionally works best for any given area? Because when you leave needs unaddressed, that problem of crime just shifts around. You don't necessarily solve anything. And so, location, time, correspond with different types of crimes. That's overlap, right? That would be like, here's a good example. I can deal with a specific crime type. We'll say robbery, right? Or I could say something broader, violent crimes. Right? When you use terms like that, basically you offer yourself the opportunity to play with that a little bit. Like what exact crimes do you want to have in there? Is this something you want to just like align with UCR's classification of violent crimes? Or is this one you're going to align with literature? Or is this your own? So you can play with that some too. It's like, okay. we got a problem with robbery in this area, but how many other violent crimes are gonna be in the same kinds of areas? To what degree that actual overlap really physically manifests as we start getting out here, and then so you get to look at what is its impact. Then from there, how are we gonna address it? What works best? Well, what are we seeing right now? That kind of, and so you make those arguments. Contextualizing crime patterns. I like this because this is where they start using logic patterns a little bit. Here, this is what I was talking about in terms of, to some degree, if you want to predict the outcomes of any research, it's like, yeah, just look at what your variables are and what are the possible options for outcomes, like their classifications. Here, burgle, never target hardened, right? So if we're dealing with burglaries and the intersection of target hardening, it's like, here's the different ones you've got, okay? You were burgled, that's a funny word. Yes, no, that's basically it. Did you have target hardening? Yes. Yes. Or actually, no, yes. Yes. Additional burglary. Yes. Additional burglary, right? So those are your options there. So did we have burglary before? Yes, no. Do we need an intervention? Sometimes they put intervention, yes, even when there hadn't been prior burglaries. Sometimes when people take those actions to harden to remove the opportunities for crimes to take place. With that, okay, you got what happens as a result. Okay, you think that target hardening efforts would send that signal that, hey, yeah, you don't want in here. What signal does it actually send?
We've got good stuff in there.
Yeah, it's maybe you don't want to come in here. Maybe there's something worth coming in here for, right? And so you can kind of start to see that those patterns start to show up here. And then it's going to become the numbers game. Right? Okay. Which of these comes in greater frequency? Which of these takes place in what areas? Depending on what specific actions, what changes the likelihoods of these things manifesting in those ways. And so it builds out from there. Okay. And so this is what I'm talking about, data and how it's needed and that kind of thing. And so it becomes, what do I want to say? It becomes clear the amount of thought that's put into this. It's not something that's always straightforward, like reading a textbook. It's just stopping and thinking about it sometimes. And from there, burglary stats, target hardened property, hardening. I'll give you some more on that, show you some of the density there. Is there anything else I want to mention? Perspective hotspotting. Okay, so this is where they start to move into some new predictive areas. Right? And so predictions are kind of a dangerous thing. Did I tell you guys about predictive policing in, what was it, like 2014, 2016, something like that? It was 2016. Interesting thing related to it. If you're going to look at predictive policing, that kind of stuff, how it's done and how people perceive it and what it's doing are big factors. So as you're thinking about that, stakeholders, people involved kind of thing, keep that in mind for this too, because it's something the impressions that people have whenever they approach some of these topics can be a little bit dangerous. The hot spotting stuff, predictive policing, that kind of stuff. Basically what happens there is you're using established patterns to predict out things that they're going to take place. No new information there for you guys. You know that past behavior is the biggest predictor for future behavior. One of the biggest predictors for future behavior. Not all there is to it, but there's part of it. Okay? Now, however many variables you use in that model can refine that to some degree. When we start talking about like control variables and things you need to take into account because they overlap with other variables, well, one of those are your demographic measures, right? And so if you stop and think about this, and some ways to be negative if you don't manage that side of it is, I think it was 2016, could have been a little bit later. They had a big movement with predictive policing, hotspotting, that kind of thing, and where they were sending police. As a result, people too dug into it. I want to say this was it Harvard or was it Stanford Law Review? I can't remember which one it was. published an article, and basically what it was several pages talking about the fact that your racial demographics are in this model and you're using it to predict behavior and for policing patterns. Well, what you end up there with is a potential recipe for discriminatory practices. It's like, yes, that is true, right? It's like, that's in there, that's specified. So if that's the only thing you want to focus in on, it's like, you can focus in on that if you want to. But you have to realize at the same time, it's something that separates out that effect. So now you can see what those true effects for everything else is. But that's more meant. When you start getting into perspective spotting, they give you a number of different theories in here: event dependency explanation, burglary, boosted status. Here's where they start talking about contagious diseases. You can see some of those elements they draw on, like health there. That's the basic premise for that near hotspot stuff, rather than just the repeat victimization. It's that contagious element. As crime takes place, what's the likelihood that that opportunity is going to lead to more crime taking place? Your repeat phenomenon. Benefits. Right here. These are area-based, not events-based. So, you start looking at targeting resources. What areas need it? Like, we know where crimes are. We also have to balance out needs of people across locations, kind of thing. And so how that's going to work will change to some degree based on the area. Here it says identification of clusters of near repeats actually match the spatial distributions of risk rather than traditional hot spotting techniques. And so you start to see, it's like we start to get a little bit closer to it. But here's how it's benefits: resources, publicity, and getting people to act. Backcloths from social media and possible analyses. Here's where they start getting a little bit farther into it. They start talking about an interesting thing. Okay, I've talked a little bit about this before in terms of available information that's just right there. Right. Much can be achieved to fill gaps about our knowledge about ambient populations through mapping population growth from an analyzed GPS coordinates. Okay. So when you start getting into that, the role of mapping and that kind of stuff, it's like you have to realize there's a few different ways you can do it. It's in terms of grassroots efforts are probably the easiest, the most interesting things to talk about this. And you can see the amount of effort it would take to do this for an individual. You're going to map out large groups of people and their movements through space. This is not very easy thing to do. This stuff originally started with what was it? There was some type of natural disaster and as a response. Oh, I should remember this a little bit better. But as a response, what happened is people, as they were trying to navigate, they were using their phones and social media to track where people were, what problems were taking place. And you can see this stuff when you do it like that, how quickly they were able to gather that information. It'd be like another area that I've seen it was this was over in Africa. They were marking rape zones is what it was. And so they're dealing with basically a really rough area. And then as people were moving through this country, what would end up happening is there are certain areas where, hey, if that action occurs, because it's so common there, what women would do is they'd go and there's some way that they're actively marking the scene. I forget exactly what it was. They're like tying a ribbon or something like that to show, to warn people. It's like this area is where that happened. And you can see this area, there's a whole bunch of those strings tied, something like that. And as you're going through and classifying this, you can see, like, okay, where are your real risks? What's actually happening? That kind of stuff. And so you get to this, it's like routine activities. Whether you're talking about land use, street networks, buildings, all that kind of thing. You see people, how they can actually move, that kind of thing, you get a lot farther. Okay, and then think about this type of information, how much more is available today than ever before. That'd be like asking you, I don't want to put that. All of the different systems that are tracking this type of information across corporations. That'd probably be the quickest way to say. Think about how much that information is available on the population at large, and all of the good can be done with it, right? Okay. Use geography, population movements in and around crime scenes, around the offense, right? That way you can assess witnesses and stuff like that. So it's like there's the spans here that you can cross. Very, very large. But what it is, in terms of information, well, let's see where this one. 2 years of georeference Twitter data. Estimate populations on hourly basis across a week in an entire city, right? That's the kind of stuff that they're getting. And so when you have that level of information, you start applying it over here to these types of things, the level of resolution you get massively increases. Okay. Resolution anonymous customer data. I don't care about that so much. Online crime mapping. This is where you start to get some of that data about police.uk right there. Repository of data behind the maps that names crime counts to be downloaded for further analysis. That is a very, very big thing that's going on right now that you may not be aware of. Let me show you this. I said open data initiative. You know anything about what I'm talking about? Okay. Open data, Tulsa. That's not the one. We'll just go to the next one now. Here we go, the actual data. This is one that started ArcGIS. Okay, neighborhood, recreation, political, public safety, other. By clicking the public safety, what kinds of data is available there? Okay. So I've got the different types. Say, give me CSV, not just CSVs. You can't just click by that. Say, police squads, divisions, beats, application location of beats, that kind of. I only have 3 here for this one. We go political, council districts. That's a little bit of a start. Let's do this. Open data. Boom. Browse. Right? Here you are. Same kinds of information. Next big city. A lot of large cities are doing this. Why? That right there. They've got crime lists. Right? And so this is something that it does. It correlates to careers if you want it to. But really what it is if you like the data side of it, doors open. Okay, translating analysis for intervention into action. This is where they start telling, yeah. Identify key findings emerging. Classify these into different types. Label them if you can. That's more of the, when you start getting into labeling things, that's a little bit of the conceptualization processes there. You have some freedoms there. It's actually quite common. And then brief narrative here. So that. Stage A, the starting points for classifying results. Stage B, actions. Any actions that need to be taken from any of these things. What needs to happen? What circumstances does it need to happen? That's all going to be driven from the data. Stage C is translated into recommendations. And then finally, the structured approach right here. And this is it, right? Evidence-based and justified. You have a plan of action. It's short and clear. You've addressed any legal and ethical implications. It is realistic. Like that's one of the ones that if you do this, I'm going to kind of pop down to the next one that talks about evaluation. So anytime you're dealing with organizations, that realistic element, that's a huge one. Whether it's just is this real or is it flighty, I guess would be the right word I'd want to use. You know, the flowery language where you get to you know, we're here, we're aiming to help such and such. And it's like if you don't give any actual metrics for what you're doing or how you're doing it. Basically what ends up happening is it's the same thing you'll see in other areas where if you don't clearly define what your goal is or that why statement, why you're doing what you're doing, basically what ends up happening there is things go off the rails a little bit. you get into the, yeah, this isn't real. There's nothing really here. It's like, are you really intervening and what is your purpose? That kind of thing. I don't want to say that because that's a recurrent one that you'll find a lot of organizations, particularly if they ever reach out for like the evaluation side of things. Or if you yourself are trying to get into, hey, maybe we need to start changing how these things work, this policy side of things. And legal, ethical, plausible, realistic, that it's required, meaning that you have to do it. That's efficiency. Complementary, non-contradictory, and relevant target audiences. Those are pretty straightforward. Deciding what to do. How much you want to talk about this? Science, engineering. We're going through this one pretty fast. This one was just straightforward, right? Because this one's just, yeah, crime. Everybody does it. We need to restrict opportunities. It's not random or equally distributed. Routine activities theory. So this one's just pretty straightforward. Not necessarily repetitive, but here's where they start identifying. Here's what you do. You're looking at the situation. Here's some ways to address opportunity. 9. There you go. Mechanisms. Need to look at whether it's physical, social, spatial, and its time elements. And from there, finding out what works. Yeah, specific crimes considered. And so here's where they start moving into like, if you're looking at specific crimes, here's how you want to handle it, that kind of thing. Implementation. Does this really get into it? Maybe they don't get into it that much. Yeah. So now this is a setup for evaluation and review. And so from that initial set points like that group of people that you'd need to get on board and talking. If there's already implementations in place, interventions in place, there's already something implemented, that's a whole lot easier. You don't need to justify that. That's not something you'll have to assemble. You're looking to get involved in identifying who your first point of contact will be, and figuring out your method of approach. If it's one that's you're building it from the start, you're going to have that initial approach for basically anyone you want to get involved if they don't already have some type of social connection. And so that's where you start really working that. I don't think I talk about that so much in this one, but that social side where it's okay. You know, if you've got someone who's already got a connection, you use that person as a facilitator themselves, kind of to open that door to establish identification, and then you build it from there. But at each step and every point in time, it's like you need to consider the people you're involved in, what their goals are, and how they fit what it is you're doing. So that way, anything that you do will align with their thoughts, their ideas, and what they want to do. And when you're dealing with big groups like that, because it doesn't take long for it to get fairly large. It's like you deal with more like 5 people. There are going to be people who have different ideas for how things should go, that kind of thing, and managing that is its own difficult thing. So, partnership and leveraging crime prevention. Here. Main barriers to successful partnership, reluctancies of some agencies to participate, right? And so that's making that argument right here. And the absence of understanding how the process works, the implementation process, here's what you need to know. Like, is it a bad idea that was well executed, bad idea, badly executed, good idea, badly executed, good idea, well executed? So basically what they start getting at is when you're dealing with things that are unrefined and you don't know exactly what they are, you start classifying them in that way, okay? Are we moving in the right direction? And did we do what we say we were going to do? Was it actually implemented in the way that it was supposed to be? Right? Because that's gonna be your first initial questions. What was actually implemented? Does it align with what we're trying to do? And how well did it actually work? And so you end up with those types of statements to try to see what's going on. From there, theoretical applied concepts for successful implementation. Here we go. Major models for successful implementation. This International Center for Prevention of Crime. Here's what they are. 3 essential characteristics for safe and sustainable communities. Comprehensive approach, meaning you're not going to focus on just one facet. Because the more comprehensive it is, it's sort of like that shotgun approach to some degree. It's like you widen it out, the more likely you are to address those root causes, right? When we're talking about deciding what to do, basically what it does is it kind of goes to Sarah and identify the nature of what's taking place there. You'll see that that comprehensive approach, the wider the target is, the more likely it is you're going to hit that one of those key factors that's driving crime. And so you think about it from the crime element, from the victimization, as well as all those other factors, social, environmental, institutional, right? And from there, you're basically saying everything else, the context of everything else. The next one, engagement of key stakeholders. Right? That's going to be a big one. Right? And then right there, clear and consistent leadership. Right? There's anything more to add on that. Okay. The next one, I give you 8 principles in which crime prevention should be based. And this is going to be a little bit more in detail, but it follows the same kind of lines. Right? The government leadership is what you're talking about this one because it's UN. Here you're talking about, again, that's socioeconomic development, cooperation and accountability, that kind of thing. Use of a knowledge base, using proven practices. There you go. There's your ethics and law, interdependence, right? So here's that linking of local to bigger problems as well. That's UN. And then differentiation, respecting the needs of men and women and vulnerable members of society. So basically what it is there is you start to see that, I don't know what to say, that you take into account, the different populations you're dealing with. And from there, here's what matters for me. Heck, points out that the theory, getting the theory right really does matter. Relevant crime data on their own will not reveal most appropriate intervention. The sound theory will. So there's that logic and reasoning, the importance of theory. So those theoretical propositions that establish those relationships, and so long as there's that logical, reasonable connection between those relationships and what you're dealing with, you're a lot more likely to get to what you're trying to get to, because you're looking at it from that, not just the relationship of the numbers, but those relationships between those concepts. Everything that we've been reading tells us that it should align this, or maybe there's some debate there. And then, okay, if we're following that, we'll be able to get closer to what's actually taking place because we're building off of all of that. Okay. As a result of repeated failure to recognize this, even well executed and sophisticated crime prevention endeavors frequently fail because too narrowly defined, understood, including by those working to achieve the goals. Ongoing tendencies to attempt too much too soon. That's the other one, right? Where on the error side of that comprehensive nature, you want to expand it to where it gets the whole thing. You can't do everything all at once, though. And so that's what they're doing, that kind of caution right there is that, you need to have it, sort of like factors for any other things. Like, okay, be wide enough, but not too wide. You also want to be specific, but if you get too specific, you're going to be too narrow. And so it's really one of those things you have to work with it as you're doing it to see just what's needed. Let's see here. Type 2 translation research. I'm trying to remember what that was. Type 1 refers to application of basic discoveries and to the development of preliminary testing and prevention measures. So efficacy does it do it? Type 2, factors, models, processes for effective strategies in communities, service settings, and populations. That's me on what factors. This is basic, type 1, type 2 goes up a little bit more. And then from there, diffusion of innovations theory, translation settings, stage setting during pre-adoption phases, institutional adoption, evidence-based interventions, effective implementation, and sustainability. So what they're getting out there with TIES is that TIES, yeah. Okay, is that process, just like my way here, where I turn around. Going through that pre-adoption phase, the institutional adoption phase, implementation, and maintaining. Because just like with any efforts,
that consistency factor is going to be a huge element. They talk about time. If you think about in this class, all the different ways that we talk about crime, you're talking about just analysis of crime in general. It's like you're talking anywhere from hot hours, hot days, hot weeks, hot months, hot years kind of thing. What's that time element is a huge factor. But what happens so frequently whenever we have interventions is it's hard to maintain those, right? If you're talking about like policy changes and stuff like that, that's like a one-time intervention that you maintain from there for an organization. But if you're dealing with, let's say it's something a little bit more direct with people, it's like, yeah, sustainability there is going to be a huge factor. Like how many times have there been major changes at whether you're talking group, neighborhood, city level kind of thing, and it's going to be based off of weather. Typically, we'll see it's like someone will go in, they'll put up something like this, they'll bring in resources to put it together. Usually what will end up happening is some of that's going to be funded off of grants or outside resources at some point in time. Whatever relationship that was providing those resources will attenuate because someone there's got only a finite amount of resources that's going to be redirected somewhere else. And so from that point in time, if that happens, that program goes away. It's very common to see, anytime you see that, what ends up happening if you did have changes at these levels, if it was working, when that funding starts to disappear, or you start to solve that problem, the public interest goes away, so does funding. And when that does, all those positive changes go away and you revert right back to where it was before. And so it's one of those things you have to maintain over time. All right. From there. Implementation, they give you, this is my implementation process. This is doing services, just 6 stages: exploration, installation, implementation, full, innovation, sustainability. Recursive in nature. Yeah, and so basically what it is it's identifying that process for any type of change. And it is one that is constantly bouncing back and forth for any organization. Principles of good governance. Yeah, 5 core principles. Here they are, right here. Good governance. Legitimacy and voice. There you go. Direction, strategic vision, performance, accountability, fairness. Right? This is how other people interact with it. This is how the organization runs. This is its actual productivity. This is transparency. Yeah, they even use the word right there. Fairness, how people are treated across whole groups as an equal. Partnerships to persuasion. Here's where they start talking about hierarchy of methods applied to police agencies to accept responsibility for community problems. And so this is some of those areas where they start to give you some ideas for making those cases. They're going to have those conversations. Here's how you get people to some degree, if they've got vested interests that align with what their positions are. What will happen is you can use these types of arguments as a way to influence them, try to help them. All right, and then it gives you examples of effective and ineffective implementation. There's a lot of those. And last step, evaluation and review, lesson. Okay, I like this part right here. You're told policies work. Randomized controlled trials will show you what these are, what policies work. Random controlled trials are great. They do not do that. They alone cannot support the expectation the policy will work for you. If they tell you is true, that this policy produced, that the results are there, they do not tell you why it is relevant, what you need to do bet on to get the results you want. For that, you need to know a lot more. I like that because we're talking about interventions, that kind of thing. Trials are a good way to test things. Pilot studies are very, very common whenever you, if you're actually implementing, whether it's a program, an intervention, study. Usually what you'll do is you want pilot to see that it's operating and get you kind of somewhere in the area that you want to get. Randomized controlled trials. Well, I mean, you've gone right back into, you say trials, what are we talking about? We're talking about that same intervention, right? Pre-intervention, post. The experimental method is what you're talking about there. Yes, it will get you what you want. If you randomize it, all of your other variables should, in theory, equalize out. You get the thing that you say that you're looking for. Is that really what's driving? And how do you tell the difference? I'm gonna give you that same conversation. We had that one before. I think in here probably that race issues come up in the way that's been measured before. It's like, that's kind of that right there. It's like, yeah, you see racial disparities, but is that why? It's like exceedingly few studies actually get into that. They just, oh, we found this disparity, we're supporting. Okay, that's good, but if you're gonna get to the practically applicable side, you need to know a lot more. And that's where this all goes. Like this all gets back into, hey, we're actually doing something, we're actually getting back into it. Here's what we're talking about, constructing evaluations. Elements of crime prevention evaluations. There you go. I like that. A little picture, right? So you have some idea for how things fit together in an abstract sense, right? You know what the intervention mechanism is. It's going to handle certain cases, but there's a lot more going on than what's with those cases. And as you're dealing with that, it's trying to figure out how that exactly parses out. And so they give you a few different variations of this. Consider evaluation of landlord interventions, curbing crime, drug dealer locations, intervention package, evaluating police enforcement, contact owner, narcotics detective, police communicate threat of civil action if they didn't cooperate, and so none of the stuff was tested. Okay, outcomes. Outcome prevention is to change the targets, cases, you already know that. That's the number of people you're dealing with, whether that's crime, people, whatever your unit of analysis is. We were talking about that before. Crime, one of those ones that's one of those social productions kind of thing. But that's something that's it's produced. So it itself would be, what do I call that? Productions artifact. That's usually what they call those. That'd be things like crimes, newspapers, things like that that fall into those social artifacts, the social productions. And so sometimes your cases deal with actual cases of people, sometimes deal with cases as in incidences, sometimes it's crimes, sometimes it's other things. For most of this stuff, since we're dealing with interventions and that kind of thing, it's really going to depend on whether or not you're dealing with an organization deals with individuals or groups, or whether you're dealing with crime itself, because then you're probably bound to one of these other things. Okay. Criteria for judging effectiveness. So here's where they start getting into it. And this is essentially a method lesson. I was be talking about things like parsimony, things of that nature. How simple is your explanation? How causal ordering, that kind of stuff. And so here it says, is there a good reason to believe that the intervention could act on the type of cases we're interested in? So what is that? Logic and reasoning again. That's going to be your mechanism. That's going to be how it should work. Is there a statistical relationship? That's association, right? And so, I don't know, maybe I will do this real quick since I won't keep here too much longer too many. And so what that's going to look like is this. Prevention, target, and mechanism question. That association. When they start talking about association, what are they talking about? Correlation, right? You may remember from methods class, correlation does not equal causation. Yes, that is correct. But it is one of the ways that we establish that causal link, because if there is a relationship there, then all we need to figure out is ordering, which one comes first? That's up there too. This says temporal order, right? Does that intervention precede the changes in crime? If it does, then that's gonna be a cause kind of thing, or potential one. You start with this correlation, then you have that time element. Omitted variables, moderators, mediators, and other types of relationships. I put that up there because they put rival causes. Basically, we start talking about there parsimony that what you want to have is something as simple as it can be, because it's still going to be complex. And you want to make sure that you're not missing anything that matters, that there's not something else that's controlling everything, and there's not something in the middle that's changing it. And that's basically what they start talking about. If you look at like research methods, it's like if you're missing something important, that'd be like taking that race element out of that predictive policing. What ends up happening is the bias that you had there that was racial in nature, your racial bias, you now turn that into something that's you silenced it, I guess, would be one way of looking at it. Like that's not something that's good. You want to know if that's there. And so that way you can take that into account and not use that in a negative way, but benefit people, but that's a different conversation. Moderator. X, Y. Okay. Typical relationship here. A moderator would be up here, and it could have directions this way, or any way in between. Right? It is over this relationship and controls how it functions. A mediator would be like X, Y, Z. And that would be your mediator. It's not that your dependent variable actually controls whatever thing you're trying to target. It's that it controls this other variable, and when that variable is changed, it does this. Over here, what that looks like is it may have a direct effect too, and it may affect this other thing, which also affects this. That's one of those recursive feedback loops you see all over the place, right? And so pulling out these rival causes is a huge element of it too. And that's one that's to some degree that's gonna be reflective of your time in the literature. It's gonna be reflective of your personal experiences and the amount of time you just stop and think about this and the people you're talking about. And then findings. They support or contradict the general theory. And last one's about generalization, right? So in terms of findings themselves, we'll start with that generalizability thing. What do I mean by generalizability?
If it can be applied to other instances.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because stop and think about this for a minute. If we're doing this kind of stuff, these things tend to be very, very specific. I mean, it's like, are you dealing with like a specific program, a specific location, a specific issue? You know, it's like these things are going to be very specific. And then so when you start dealing with the areas coverage, you start getting a little bit more about generalizability. That tends to be a big limitation. It's like, yeah, we're you know, for this type of situation, it's like these findings will directly apply for this, but there is some question as to whether or not it's generalizable to everything else. And so in that methodological process, you can build that out so that way you can test that. But that's more of methods than this. I mean, make you guys go through that kind of thing. Torture of listening to more method stuff. But there you go. Is it generalized to other places? Because at that point it has a little bit more value. But at least it's like, what are we finding? And does it align with what we found before? Because hey, that's part of that conversation, that debate. It's like, does this actually matter? Well, yeah, but it depends on where and when and what you're dealing with. Okay, what you're finding out, that kind of thing here. Trying to think of something that I found that was, ooh, here's a good one. So I was researching fear of crime stuff. I'll tell you guys a little bit about that last time. And that overlap between avoidant locations and the locations people go, right? And so one of those findings is that the higher level of fear, the less likely it is that someone's gonna go there, right? Or is it that as someone's encountering a place that instills fear, that fear level, that experience of being there is actually what drives their fear level in the first place, rather than they have a high fear level and they avoid places. It's that whole feedback cycle, right? And so how does it actually functionally test out? And it's, okay, to what degree is it that the fears you have are because they're real fears that you're integrating in society, or to what degree is it the fears because you're familiar with the place or that you're not familiar? Some degree of unfamiliarity is going to generate fear. If there's real danger there, that's also going to generate fear. And so it's like that novelty thing. How do you separate those relationships out so that way they align with whatever your general theory is? Because there's going to be complex. And it takes a little bit of thought. And sometimes it's just getting in there and seeing what it does and then seeing if you need to adjust course anywhere. And that's that back to the review and then reviewing programs. Okay. So mechanisms. Here's where they talk a little bit about that. Alternative interventions being tested for different mechanisms, right? And so here what it is they're testing a couple of different mechanisms to see what it does. Here you've got the, what is this called? I can't think of it. Different pattern though. And so you get different ways to test it out. Association, we've already talked about. Temporal work, we've already talked about. Causes, we've already talked about. Here you go. There's a list of methodological weaknesses in research. Let's just highlight that. See it. Right. And so that will come straight out of any methodology textbook. Basically, what we start talking about there are whenever you are analyzing something, that process of analysis, I don't want to say analysis, process of analysis. These are some of the problems that repeatedly pop up as people are employing. Selection. Cases that receive interventions are systematically different from cases that do not get treatment. That affects the outcome. So if you start thinking about treatments, if you think about it from that individual placement, okay? Think about the relationship between risks assessed to someone and the likelihood that they'll end up in a program that benefits them. Because one of the things that can happen is that, you know, if I want to have a successful program, I'm going to target the at-risk youth that are at the lowest risk because I'm more likely to be successful, right? And so as you're setting those thresholds for what your actual target population is, what's actually getting drawn into the program, it's going to be completely unattached for anything that you do. That's the first one right there. Who are we dealing with, right? Is this the group that we're dealing with, this issue we're dealing with? Is it something that how we have it separated out? You can make comparisons otherwise, because if they're too different, it's like that selection thing, you start to weaken your comparison, that kind of thing. History, about the same time as the intervention, external changes. The best example I ever had of history. Professor of mine, probably, I think it was 20 years ago. So I'd have to stop and think back the year because maybe it wasn't quite 20 years ago. Hurricane Katrina. I think I may have mentioned that one last time. He was actually doing a fear crime research study, and in the middle of it, Hurricane Katrina comes through and wipes out the whole area. It's like, okay, all of your findings, everything you're studying is no longer about what you're studying. It's about that event. It's what it is, because that event is going to have such a powerful impact on what you're doing. It changes everything. That would be like, you're running a survey about, basically anything involving people in, March of 2020, right? Everything's shut down. It's like, yeah, you're not really studying anything but just COVID, because it's just such a big issue. History's huge. Maturation's another one, right? As time goes by, people change. This is like IQ. Whenever you take an IQ test, one of the first things they ask you is your age. It's age graded, that's a time thing. You'll have different effects for different things. In fact, in psychology, what they do is they split it out into liquid and crystallized intelligences, if you really want to get into. But what that is that as you're younger, there's more liquid there, and as you get older, you've had more time to crystallize it. And so it's a little bit about how fast you can, that liquid is how fast you can process information, and that crystallizes how much you can integrate it, and how quickly you can start putting it together. That crystallizes, that's that maturation side of things. You've had more time to learn more things, and so you've changed over time. That's why if you do it, you have that control, so that way that element can be accounted for to some degree. Attrition is everywhere. Dropout, right? Every study will have it. It's like you can have a 5-minute survey, and it can be 15 questions, and you'll have people who click 2 buttons and stop, and you can see it there. If you're running a survey, usually what will happen if you have an incomplete is it will save those results, and if no one completes it in the time that it's available, guess what? You'll get it, and you'll have those partial answers. You can see right where they stopped off. It's the same thing for any other program, any other thing that you want to do. At some point, life's going to come in and take some people out, whether that's the permanent way or whether that's just life factors, just drawing someone away from the program or a study or something like that. It's like that's going to be there. Testing. You want to call this that? There's a number of things that go into that with testing, number of ways to do it. But basically, the fact that you're tested on something will change your outcome for future tests to some degree. That's that test retest method kind of stuff. There's actually quite a bit to get involved with the testing side of it, because to some degree it's okay, are we having repeated tests? Because every time you're exposed to it, you're going to gain something else. Is it the Hawthorne effect, where what we're asking questions about is going to dictate what you see, or is it something like there's another testing thing we can talk about. What was it? Change. I guess those probably get it. There's a third one I can't think of at the moment. Another way that testing will come back in there and change things. Instrumentation. That's the big one that will be involved with those who are designing. How you ask a question will always influence it. Always. And you have to keep that in mind in terms of what you're asking, how you ask it, the specific words that you use, who's going to read it. Right? You probably had conversations with someone in other classes, like if you're going to do a survey, what's the reading level you need to write it to so that everyone can read it. It's like if you're dealing with, say you're dealing with a juvenile study, so okay, that's going to be really that kind of thing. If you're dealing with ones that involves the parents, it's like, is that 8th grade kind of thing? Because the average person in they can understand 8th grade, but not everyone can, kind of thing. And so it's like you have to keep that in mind. Where you see it most clearly, probably the easiest place to see it are things related to sex crimes. The definition of rape is the easiest one, because you'll go to UCR, you'll see legacy, and then the current definitions. And basically what that is, they changed the wording because when people were reading it, there's a whole bunch of things that they weren't realizing that would classify victimization that was not being reported. I think that whole clearly clarifying that consent and not just the force element was a big issue. Still kind of is. It's like, yeah, you have to be able to keep that in mind, right? If I say, when you're talking about victimization, that kind of stuff, if you ask questions, it's like, will people realize, that the types of crimes you're talking about are included in the types of questions you're asking? That's all going to be part of that instrumentation, the way that you present it. And it's from the individual words and questions all the way to the flow of the actual, any type of instrument that you use. I'd be like talking about surveys and where you put demographics. right? Because, what was it, a few years back, there's a big discussion about where demographics are best put on a survey, because people don't like answering those questions about, you know, race, ethnicity. It's like, it's so common, so standard bearer that sometimes people just like, okay, I'm done with this thing, shut off. You need those measures for your controls, so you need to have them, but you don't want to shut people off. And so, do you want those at the beginning of the survey? Do you want them at the end of the survey? And if you don't get them, you can't use any of the information. And so it's considerations like that that need to be thought about when you talk about instrumentation. And of course, combinations, because all of those things are like everything else. It's a big spider's web. Here's what we'll start talking about: internal validity kind of stuff. Generalizing, we've already talked to. Here, let's start talking about experiments and evaluations. Okay. So choosing the right design. Now, of course, this is going to deal with you know, what your topic you want to delve into. If you're dealing with like city level, like intervention efforts, you're almost always going to be dealing with your experimental design. Or a lot of times you're talking about cross-sectional and longitudinal studies where not necessarily will they have an actual intervention kind of thing. It'll just be seeing the relationships. That randomized experimentation is a gold standard because that's how you control for everything in the study that's not actively stated. Like, let's say that for some reason, I don't know, you're looking at age effects. If you don't have that randomization, your two groups, if their average age is significantly different from one another, then hey, those comparisons, and if age is an issue, like that's gonna be off. And so you randomize that so that way if you get enough numbers, it'll balance out. Central limit theorem. I think I'm gonna talk about that. That's not stuff. Here. Interdependence. Cases have no influence on other cases. Cross-contamination, that's another thing where we start talking about displacement, diffusion, that kind of thing. However, when you start talking about randomization, it's like that's not always possible, nor is it always ethical. If you're doing anything related to people, yeah, that's not ethical. Start doing crime, it's like, okay. If you deal with that, so you get in that boundaries. You can go into some unethical places really quickly. Quasi-experimental and non-experimental methods. So that quasi-experimental method, there's a few different ways that may take place. You'll start to actually run into those when you start seeing some of the, I won't say it like, we'll say it like this. Standard is you have at least two groups: your experiment, your control group, your pre, your post, and your interventions. It's not always the way it works, right? So if you think about, you know, you're going to evaluate a program, you're going to go in there, and as you're trying to figure out, okay, what their goals were, what things that they've done, what interventions that they used, what kind of data is available? Do you have those measures to where you can see what people are coming in with? You know, if like this is something that's supposed to, whatever it changes. It's like, do you have that baseline measure of where they're at when they came in? Do you have a baseline measure at the end? So that way you can make those comparisons across those groups. And if you're coming into a program that did not have well-defined goals, has not been tracking stuff, what do you end up with? Quasi-experimental design. You're not going to have that pre-stuff, maybe. Or maybe there's some other facet of it to change, because it doesn't have to be one that is locked into that randomization, experiment, control, pre and post. You also have that randomization thing. If you don't have that randomization, there's other ways to do it. Maybe you're using a matched method. Like these two groups, I selected them, yes, because the numbers are low, but the way I selected them, put them in different groups, the factors that we're worried about balance out because I matched them, right? And so there's a whole bunch of ways you can get to this kind of. And then non-experiments don't require any manipulation.
right? That's the things that's like what most people do. You're just using stats to identify and compare things. Process evaluations. You're just looking at implementation and function again, just like we mentioned in the previous factor. Learning from evaluations. Here you go. Making inferences from theory and evaluations. It's a mess, right? So theoretical interventions move back and forth here. Inferences to other interventions moving over here. Other interventions over here. So it's spider web. Inference to intervention use, inferences to theory's validity. So this is the part you're working on, but it also has these other aspects of it too. In conclusion, no theory, no lesson. Basically what he's getting at there is that guiding principle, whether you're talking about your program and its goals. You know, you see it for us, it's that theory element. And it's like that theory can be, they put it as a theoretical. It's like, yeah, it's like you can have work that's done that doesn't really have much of a theory, but realize when you get down to it, it's like there's always gonna be some theory at play. It's just how well did you specify it? And then as you specified it, did you go through and make sure that all the rest of those steps are there to be able to analyze it. So there you go. Here they say, summarize chapter's main arguments in 7 points. We want evaluations of specific crime prevention interventions to teach us the general lessons, right? That inductive reasoning process. So we can see how it applies. Neither internal nor external validity can give such lessons. That's true. We can generalize by way of theory. Propose a general theory that passes tests, most of which are not open evaluations. From theory of survived tests, deduce a general intervention. That's the deductive side, right? It's the inductive side as you build up on it. Deductive side is you delve back in to see if it's actually working. All right. From there, some quotes here. Okay, general of interest, operationalized form of specific interventions. So basically, you go from specific to general, back to specific, and then strong test operationalization provides evidence about that. So testing again, evidence has bearing on the validity of general intervention and to the theory. From there, specific operationalizations that don't survive. Yeah, some of it doesn't. So in doing that, you produce valid generalizations. It's that whole research process is what they're outlining there. Is literally, it's like, here's what we want. We want to be able to take this body of information, this body of data, and be able to go into it specifically enough that we can identify what those general rules are. As we identify those general rules, go back and verify to increase that generalizability. Okay. Generalization for any specific intervention not based on theory is without foundation. That is true. If you don't understand what the causal networks are, then we end up with just numbers, right? You have to understand that it's like if you're dealing with whether it's crime pattern theory, it's like that aggregation of people and places. Whether it's social disorganization theory, it's about the movements there and the transitions that take place and how crime is a result. It's like the different theories, learning theory. It's about your social connections and how those things reinforce. And so the big thing here is making sure your theory aligns with your topic of interest, but also realize at the same time that's going to be out in the literature too. So if you ever have any questions there, or if you're trying something that you don't know, it's like there's a body of research to kind of refer back to see, and then we can work on that kind of thing. From there, weakly supported theories sometimes take place, and then negative findings of specific interventions are damning of the interventions without sound theoretical roots. So basically what they're saying there is it's like, okay, when you set out in any research project, you have your hypotheses, your null hypotheses, start finding those null hypotheses getting supported. We're trying to find effective intervention efforts, axe those. It's like you found out something new, still very valuable, but what it does is if it's something that's already widely supported, you found something negative, it calls it into question. That's going back to that conversation, that debate, that kind of thing. And so if that's something that we see shifts, that's good information. We want to know that. All right. And it gives you a negative example there. Any questions? Because that wraps up that last chapter. And so, crime prevention stuff. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. Except we talked a whole lot about it this semester, didn't we? Yes, we did. Okay, so we've got, was it 1 or 2 classes left? Just 1? Or do you guys want to meet finals week?
All right.
I saw how
I
you
don't
looked
mind.
over. Don't say 2. Yeah, so we got 1 more class left. So I've kind of been talking about papers a little bit. I've been, the ones that were turned in that Wednesday last week, 1 week ago, I've yet to get those. I mean, I've got them printed off, they're actually in the bag right there. And so those will be on the list for probably tomorrow night with the current schedule, because I'll just probably crash out for a few hours and then wake up and start moving again and get right back into it. And so those, I would expect those by latest it'd be Sunday. I wouldn't expect it to take that long, but what I'll do is I'll go through there and make any other revisions that I see, and we'll start building out the, I don't want to say models, because that's not the right word. Exemplars is what I'll do, is I'll start sending some research that identifies specific ways you can start moving into the areas that specifically coding to view. And so some of those I'll have some questions on. If you got a topic that's more open-ended, like some that we're focusing on, like racial disparities and things like that, which with topics like that, those are extremely wide open. So as you want to as we move forward with that, we'll dig into, you know, what facets of discrimination or discriminatory practices or those racial disparities you get into. That one opens up opportunities. Just like that, but also creates a little bit of a problem in that you can go a lot of things on that. And so if you've got one of those, be thinking about what specific facets of disparities interest you. Let's see, can't remember yours. You guys are solid. I got some more stuff I need to send to you, and then Tristan, I remember seeing yours. It's been a while. By that I mean it's been a few hours, so I don't remember. I'm gonna draw a blank on that one. Sorry about that. If it's one of those that's related, like discriminatory practices, what you need to think about is like, okay, that opens up opportunities. If there's any other topics that also interest you, what we should do is we should look at that and then start cross-sectioning them and interacting them, because you'll see that that'll get you. It'll just basically take that general information you have and just pop it right over to a specific place where you can dive right in, kind of thing. And then next class we'll come in here, we'll deal with papers and analyses, and what I'll do is between, say, would be next class and the end of the semester, you guys want to meet to continue developing. You want to flesh those out and see how that, you know, whether it's the methodological side, working that out, it's like we can do that, or if it's the stakeholders kind of thing, it's like we'll do that too. And to some degree, they're going to be intertwined, and you get a lot of fun there, because we end up having a lot of very, very good conversations with those stakeholders that'll start building out these types of things for you. Cool?
Mhm.
We good for today? All right. If you guys have anything comes up, you need anything, let me know. With that, I can't believe it's April.
I know.
It's like this semester went really, really fast. I'm used to semesters going fast. My goodness, this one was a blur. Let's see. Big things coming up. Is there anything big coming up? Of course, finals week, but here we just have that paper to work on. And once we're done with that, we're all squared away in here. Yeah, I guess that's it for today. All right. Happy day. Just have that paper to finish up, and you guys are doing pretty good on that. The big thing with that is just playing with the ideas is really what I wanted. And you guys started doing that a lot, and so we'll develop that and see where it goes. Cool. All right. With that, freedom.
Results.
Yeah. Let's have a great night, and I'll see you guys in 1 week, unless you want to meet sooner. And then anything, let me know. Bye. End meeting. Yes, we will end meeting for today. Have a great one.